Hello everyone and welcome back to another Division 2 video. This has to be one of the strongest PvP builds that you can make right now. This build gives you a ton of survivability, but still melts other players like it's a DPS build. Let's get right into this build. Let's check out our primary weapon and my favorite, the MP7. The MP7 does so much damage at such a high fire rate that every situation is a winnable one. As always, you want to try to get damage to targets out of cover or damage to armor for the attribute, and this time, for the talent, we're going to want Optimist. Optimist is just the easiest to proc for the damage bonuses. If you don't like the MP7 or you're worried about the nerf, that's completely fine. This build works with every SMG. The Vector 9mm SBR is going to be our secondary weapon. This is purely a personal preference. I love the SBR 9mm. I prefer this gun because it can get over 50 rounds in the magazine, but like I said before, any SMG is a great SMG with this build. I picked the Vector to be my secondary weapon because again I'm using Optimist, and with that high fire rate I can get the damage bonuses faster from Optimist. In the name of keeping confusion to a minimum, I'm going to start with the Ninja Bike backpack for the gear. This thing gives you a weapon damage core, an armor core, and a skill tier core all with one piece. That's already really strong, but what makes this thing is the talent. Basically what the talent does is unlocks the next step of the brand set or gear set. Take Walker Harris for example, if you had one piece of that, it would give you 5% weapon damage. With two pieces, you'd also get a 5% armor damage. What the Ninja Bike backpack does is it gives you both bonuses for that one piece. Up next is the chest piece. This is going to be our one and only piece of Sokolov Concern, so this will give us both 10% SMG damage and 15% critical hit damage. Run this build in any way you see fit, it'll work no matter which way you roll it. Just make sure on every piece you get as much critical hit chance and damage as you possibly can. For this build, we're going to be using the talent Unbreakable. What this does is whenever your armor breaks, you get 95% of your armor back. My reason for picking Unbreakable for this build is because we already have a bunch of armor, and there's no need for any kind of damage talent because this thing already hits really hard. Unbreakable just gives you the added opportunity to take on multiple targets at one time. We're going to use Walker Harris gloves with this build. We're getting both 5% weapon damage and 5% damage to armor. These are both multiplicative values. So the Walker Harris 5% weapon damage will actually give us a little bit more than the Sokolov 10% SMG damage. You might ask why we're not going to use the Contractor's gloves for this build, and that's because the Contractor's gloves are great, but they're a bad idea whenever you're running the Ninja Bike backpack and you're not going to use an LMG. We're going to have one piece of Grupo Sombra on our holster. This will give us 15% critical hit damage and 20% explosives damage. Why would we care about explosives damage? We care about the explosives damage because we have grenades. You can force other players out of cover with grenades, and if they don't move, that's 20% more damage they're going to take. Always roll for critical hit chance and critical hit damage. But this time, I'm going to roll an armor core onto the holster. Please remember that the amount of armor you have is totally up to you. This is just the way I prefer it on this build. As we're coming down to the last two gear pieces, we're going to be using Electrique on both of them. This is the mask and the knee pads. The reason we want Electrique on this build is for that 30% SMG damage for the 3-piece brand set bonus. Both of these pieces are going to be rolled with armor cores with critical hit chance and damage as the secondary attributes. Before we go and show the whole build, let's check out the specialization. For this build, we're going to go with the Demolitionist specialization. Number one and most critical reason we're running this is because of crisis response. Whenever your armor breaks, it refills your primary weapon's magazine. This works out perfectly because of how tanky we are. They're going to run out of ammo and we're still going to be shooting. The second reason is going to have to be that small laser pointer. It gives 7% critical hit chance to small railed weapons. Third most important is Brace for Impact. It lets you ignore an explosion every 60 seconds. That can be seeker mines, grenades, doesn't matter. Next is the Demolitionist Tactical Link. This gives your teammates 5% damage to targets out of cover. And lastly, for the Stimulant Patch, what this does is you put on an armor kit and it gives you 30% weapon handling for 15 seconds. Here's the full build. As you can see, we have 4 blue cores and 3 red cores. Everything is critical hit chance and critical hit damage. Move the brands wherever you'd like, just remember the Ninja Bike backpack has to stay on the backpack. Now we're going to find ourselves at the stats. We have just over 39,000 for our base PvP weapon damage. That's along with 59% critical hit chance and 178% critical hit damage. We have 70% headshot damage and 5% damage to armor. The stats for the Vector are pretty close to the same, the only difference is the base damage. That's going to do it for today's video. Stick around if you want to see some clips of this thing melting. I'm definitely not the best that's ever played this game, so I'm sure you guys could do it much better with this build. Let me know down below what you guys think and how you might improve this build. On your way down there, why don't you hit the subscribe button? And maybe even a like! Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye-bye!